All right, ladies and gents, what we're going to do today is I'm going to provide you with a brief introduction to the Industrial Revolution and start to look at the causes. And then we'll go into why it occurred in Great Britain first as opposed to anywhere else in Europe in a little bit. So today we're going to just do a brief overview of what exactly it is. So when we talk about Industrial Revolution in general, we're talking about this shift from hand labor to machine labor. So prior to this industrial age, up until 1800, most or all work was done with hand tools. And in the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, we see this shift occurring where those hand tools are being replaced now with machine labor. So that's, the big shift that we see. And it doesn't happen super fast. It's this gradual shift and gradual change. But that's, what this age really encompasses. So what I want to start out with is look at some of the causes of the Industrial Revolution. So we want to look at what was going on in Europe really before the mid-18th century. One of the big factors that we first want to start with is something known as the Agricultural Revolution. And the Agricultural Revolution preceded the Industrial Revolution, where you get this, shift and change in how agriculture is handled and how agriculture is dealt with. And that sets the foundation for the shifts that can occur with industrialization, after that. So one of the first things we want to start to look at is the advent of new crops that are introduced into the European world. And these crops are coming from, the New World. So these crops are, being transported back from the Americas. So we're talking about things such as corn. We're talking about things such as potatoes. So crops that, crops that we, assume are Irish, the Irish potato, these are not native to Europe. These are things that have been brought over from the Americas and actually become staples then of the European diet. We get new crops. We get these crops being produced on a much larger scale due to new farming methods. So new farming methods are going to be introduced that are going to allow for the increase in farming. It's going to allow farmers to go beyond just being, producing food at a basic level for their survival, but being able to produce food for not just themselves, but, more food for the population, to be able to provide for more people. Because the population is growing. So we see, a population increase. And as a result of that population increase, we need better farming. So because the population is getting bigger, we need better farming, more farming. One of the ways that we're going to be able to account for the need for more crops in Great Britain is something called the enclosure movement. So this is going to be very important. Let's change colors just so they don't all blend together. So the enclosure movement happens here in Great Britain, and what we're talking about is an act passed by Parliament. So Parliament is the legislative body of Great Britain. Parliament passes laws. So we're just talking about, passing laws. Sorry, my handwriting looks really messy on this. That looks really messy, but passing laws. And as a result, common land, actually, we'll erase common land. We'll just do this, not common land. Okay, we are passing laws to fence off land. Prior to the enclosure movement, farmers had various tracts of land. And in this movement, the enclosure movement, there's this push by Parliament to give farmers, large areas so that they can specialize in crops. They can create better yields in crops because of the fact that they're able to experiment with various farming methods. So we get, as a result of this, we get greater amounts. So we get greater amounts of food which then, as a capitalist society, can allow for bigger profits. So we have better practice of farming methods. We get greater amounts of food. The food supply is going to greatly increase as a result of this. But as a, an unattended a consequence that happens as a result is there's something called common land, and common land was territory that really wasn't owned by anybody, but people could go and they could farm there, and they could have a tract for their crops. This is gone. Common land has been absorbed by this enclosure movement as bigger farms are taking land and they're fencing them off. So as a result, because there's no more common land, small farmers have nowhere to farm. So these small farmers are then forced to leave and forced to go find work. And they're forced to leave their farm towns and their villages, and a lot of them are going to move to the cities. So because of this enclosure movement, this is where we're going to get the manpower for our factories. So we get two big effects of the enclosure movement. We get more food that can be used to feed the growing population, and as a result of fencing off all this land and the lack of need of all these farmers, we get an increased work supply that can now be used in factories that are going to be popping up in Great Britain. All right, second point I want to talk about, new technology is going to be one of the effects of this agricultural revolution. This new technology allows for increased amounts, increased yield of various crops that can be used to feed the growing population. Pause. Okay. One thing that we think about today all the time is crop rotation and rotating crops in certain areas, letting land lay fallow so that the nutrients can come back in the land. This hadn't been done before, and now we get this idea that if we continue to reuse the land, it's not going to yield as great crops. So they start to rotate various crops into certain territories. They start to rotate various fields and give them an off period. Farmers realize that turnips actually are really good at replenishing the soil. So, they'll farm a tract of land, 1 year with a certain crop, and then they plant turnips in the next year. So we begin to have this push for, experimentation. To see what works best. In addition of experimentation, we see that happening with selective breeding, where they are trying to create, stronger horses, fatter, woollier sheep through breeding practices, and trying to, create the best of the best that can be used, in the field for food and for various other resources. If we also want to, look at an example of a tool that's used or an idea, we get an invention by, let's turn this onto pen, by someone named Jethro Tull. And he invents something called the seed drill, which plants seeds deeper. So seeds are planted deeper into the ground, and they're planted in regular rows. So we get, more crops. We get crops that are surviving, crops that are actually producing goods. So to give you an idea, with all of these new, inventions and experimentation when it comes to crops, by 1870, English farmers produced 300% more. So 300% more than they had in 1700. So in less than 200 years, the crop yield has greatly increased because of, the experimentation and, the enclosure movement and all these various acts to help to encourage agricultural growth. The second factor that leads into the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution is something known as the domestic system or the cottage industry. So, they go hand in hand together. So when we're talking about the domestic system or the cottage industry, we're talking about industry that's done on a very small scale level. So this is done in people's homes, hence domestic. So we're looking at people, who are working in their homes. You're talking about people who are bringing raw materials. We'll do blue. So we're talking about bringing, raw materials to their home to then create some type of finished good, some type of product. A lot of them happen to be, rural farmers, and they're engaging in crafting of some sort to supplement their income. These people are not making lots of money. So this is a way to, try and find a way to make ends meet. A lot of this industry came back to textiles. So when we're talking about textiles, we're talking about cloth. So cloth made of wool, out of cotton, and you're talking about people who are skilled in various components. So, this is including spinning of fabric, of weaving this fabric into some type of cloth. You're talking about even in dyeing to certain colors. So these are all done then on a very small scale thing. And this is all done, like I said, to supplement incomes. So at the moment right now, you have a very small level, industry that's creating these textiles. But as the demand grows, we're going to see that this system is no longer going to suffice, and we're going to need, more workers, in factories to produce these goods at a faster pace. Because, one woman spinning wool into thread is not going to meet the demand, or one woman weaving this, or one machine weaving it. So this is when you're going to get the advent of factories who are going to be able to produce these tasks much faster, because there's going to be multiple machines who are taking over for these women. The last area that we want to look at would be the new economic conditions that are present in Europe. Specifically, we're going to be looking at Great Britain mostly. And this comes back to capitalism. This is what we've been talking about for the last couple of days, that capitalism is the main economic theory that's at practice right now. And the government is really focusing on laissez-faire principles. So let's write this down. That is an S, laissez-faire principles, where the government's not really getting involved, and they're encouraging this competition and encouraging the growth of the economy. There is an increase in trade between various countries, and as a result of this, there's a huge demand for manufactured goods. And if we talk about manufactured goods, if we're looking up top to this, cottage industry, they're not going to be able to meet the demands of all of these, all the manufactured goods that are wanted. So they're going to need to replace the cottage industry with something bigger that can fulfill these wants and these needs. So we're getting the advent of a mass consumer market. And we get this look for more production and better ways to meet the needs of production. So these are all the things that are going on right now that are setting the foundation for the Industrial Revolution. So whether it be the agricultural revolution, that is providing more crops, feeding the growing population, shifting the population into new areas, whether it's the new technology that goes along with that, whether it's the domestic industry that's growing but can't now meet the needs of all the demands, or the economic condition. These are all creating, it's a perfect storm to allow for industrialization to really hit the ground running and to really transform Europe. And we're going to look tomorrow how and why it starts in Great Britain.